Hey y'all, I'm Carrie.
Hey y'all, I'm Mandy.
And this is Monstrous. This episode contains topics and language that may not be suitable for all listeners, and topics that may be triggering for some. Listener discretion is advised. Okay. Recording our second case today.
Yay.
All right. So, are we ready to get into it?
Ready.
Okay. Today, we're going to go back to the 1930s, when the United States was in the midst of the Great Depression. And this year, Amelia Earhart took flight over the Atlantic Ocean solo, becoming the first woman to do this. The air conditioner, the logo group, and the Polaroid picture were all invented. As mentioned in a past episode, the Scottsboro boys were exonerated, the FBI crime lab opened, the NFL held its first indoor playoff game, and Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected to be the 32nd president of the United States. 1932 was a big year for the U.S. Through the Great Depression, big things were happening within the country. And even though the benefits of these things would not be seen for a few years, they each set the country ahead of the times. And although these were all big moments in time, none of what I just told you was the biggest event of that year. So, imagine you're a woman in the 30s. You're born to a senator and a homemaker. You go on to attend and graduate from college, where you meet a famous aviator whose solo Atlantic flight made him a hero. Then you fall in love and get married. This man you marry was the son of a U.S. congressman. He was a member of the Army Air Service, where he goes on to be awarded several honors. He was named the Time magazine's first Man of the Year. He was appointed to the NACA and received a gold medal from President Hoover himself. He had helped invent the perfusion pump, which made heart surgeries and organ transplants possible. And a year after you marry, you become the first woman to receive a first-class glider pilot license. You go on multiple exploratory flights and aerial surveys with your husband, and later you both become the first to fly from Africa to South America. Then, in 1932, you bring your first child into the world. But then, less than 2 years later, everything changes when your 20-month-old son is kidnapped from inside your home. I'm going to tell you about the biggest crime of the 20th century. This is the Lindbergh Baby kidnapping.
I've heard of that, but I don't know a lot about it.
It's crazy. I've got a lot of information from an episode, most of my information really, from an episode of a Nova documentary on PBS. Then what I didn't get about the case from the documentary, I got from the FBI website. So there are a few people overlooking the case in the documentary, trying to decide the man convicted and executed for the crime was actually guilty. The biggest of these are none other than FBI profiler John Douglas, who we talked a little bit about last week.
Mm-hmm.
This crime, as with most of America since it happened, has fascinated and perplexed John. John Douglas has worked on thousands of cases in his FBI career, including this one. And this is the case that haunts him to this day. There are more questions than there are answers in this one. So I'm going to tell you about the case, how it was resolved. Then I'll tell you the questions that were left behind, what theories are out there, and what John Douglas believed happened. And then we can talk about what we think happened. So there's a lot of information that really seems useless, but I promise it's all important for several reasons. And by the end, it'll all come together for why the backstory matters. So Charles Lindbergh was born on February 4th, 1902 in Detroit, Michigan. He was the only child of Charles Lindbergh, born as Carol Manson, who was a Sweden native, and Evangeline Lodge Land Lindbergh. He had three Older sisters on his father's side, but like I said, he was the only child that his parents shared together. His father was a U.S. congressman. His mother was a chemistry teacher at Cass Technical High School. And then she changed jobs to teach at Little Falls High School, where her son would later graduate from. Due to the back and forth between his parents from the age of 7, when his parents separated, Charles would attend more than 12 schools from childhood through his teenage years, attending none of those schools for more than 2 years. He enrolled in the College of Engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in late 1920, but he would drop out halfway through his sophomore year. Following this, he enrolled at the Nebraska Air Force Corporation's flying school. This was the first time he had ever been close enough to a plane to touch it, let alone fly it. A few days after, Charles took his first formal flying lesson. Following this, he left Lincoln, Nebraska in June to spend a few months across the states of Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana barnstorming as a wing walker and parachutist in order to earn money for more lessons and to gain more experience with planes. He also spent a short time working as a plane mechanic. So I'm going to pause and explain what a few of these things are, because I had no idea and had to look them up. So I don't want to leave anyone completely lost on what's happening. Barnstorming is what they call it when stunt pilots perform tricks, either alone or with groups. These are also known as flying circuses. So these pilots do like figure eights and, loops in the air. They turn their planes upside down, and some even let people walk on the wings while on flight, which are what wing walkers are. I know, your face says it all, because I would not be. No,
No, I'm good.
I want to be inside the plane in my seat, not on the wing.
Right.
So these wing walkers walk along the wings, they dance, they hang from the struts, and sometimes even go from one plane to another while in flight.
No, thank you.
Yeah. A
No.
parachutist is basically a skydiver. Okay, so back to the case. That winter, Charles left the job he had and went back home. But even with all the experience he had gained, he wouldn't return to the air until about 6 months later in May of 1923. At Southern Field in Georgia, Charles bought a World War I Curtiss JN-4 biplane. Don't ask me what that means, because I don't have a fucking clue. This plane was named Jenny, and he bought it for $500, which today would be about $9,228. Charles decided that even though he had not touched a plane in about 6 months, he would do his first solo flight here with Jenny. And about half an hour after buying it, Charles took flight solo for the first time. Following this, he spent about a week practicing, and then Charles took off for Montgomery, Alabama, around 140 miles west, on his first cross-country solo flight. He then spent the rest of 1923 performing nearly non-stop barnstorming acts under the name Daredevil Lindbergh. But instead of flying with a pilot, he did it on his own. Then he left Alabama and flew for the first time at night, where he landed near Lake Village, Arkansas. He continued throughout this area barnstorming, and while in Lone Rock, Wisconsin, Charles flew a physician across the Wisconsin River to attend to emergency calls that were deemed unreachable due to flooding on 2 separate occasions. Charles continued this way for about a year when he arrived in San Antonio, Texas, and reported to Brooks Field on March 19th, 1924, to begin his year-long military flight training with the Army Air Service. Charles would graduate first of his class a year later in 1925. He earned his pilot's wings and was named as a second lieutenant in the Army Service Reserve Corps. Active flyers were not needed at this time, so he returned to civilization as a barnstormer and pilot instructor. He did some part-time military flying and was later promoted to first lieutenant in December of 1925, then to captain in July of 1926. In October of 1925, Charles was hired by the RAC to lay out a flight plan and then be the chief pilot for the 278-mile contract air mail route number 2, because they used to deliver mail by air.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I always knew that, but I guess I just forgot about it until I did this. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot they did that. So on April 13th, 1926, he was sworn in, and 2 days later, he began his route. In February of 1927, he left for San Diego to oversee the design and construction of the Spirit of St. Louis. This was a custom built monoplane. Its first flight was from St. Louis to Roosevelt Field in New York's Long Island. After this, its next flight would come on May 20th, 1927, when Charles left Roosevelt Field for an aerodrome just outside of Paris, 3,610 miles from where he was to start. 6 other people had tried this flight. 3 had to land at some point along the flight, and 3 others had died. Charles was determined to be the first one to complete the first non-stop flight across the Atlantic. Yeah. No, I'm good.
I'm
No.
scared of heights.
So during this transatlantic flight, the plane was loaded up with 450 gallons of fuel that would be filtered repeatedly to avoid line blockage. This fuel caused the plane to be much heavier than when they did their test flight. Duh. So, on the day of takeoff, the plane weighed, are you ready? 5,200 pounds.
Damn.
Yeah. So, after 33 and a half hours, Charles landed at his destination. Over this time, the plane fought ice, flew through fog for hours, and he navigated only by dead reckoning, which is estimating your current position by using your past location, then calculating in your speed, direction, and time. After all the handshaking and meeting the French ambassador, he slept for the first time in what was reported about 60 hours.
How the hell do you stay awake that long?
No idea, but he did. Yeah. This transatlantic flight threw him into international infamy. The French ambassador awarded him with the highest and most prestigious given in the French order. Upon his return to the U.S., he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, which is a military decoration of the armed forces and is given to those that distinguish themselves by single acts of heroism or extraordinary achievement. Charles was the first to ever receive this award, with Amelia Earhart being the first woman to receive this same award only 5 years later in 1932. He was awarded the New York Medal of Valor in July of that year. He was promoted to the rank of colonel in the Air Corps of the Officers Reserve Corps in the U.S. Army. In December of that year, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, despite the fact that this award is almost always awarded for heroism in combat. Charles was then honored as the Times Magazine's first Man of the Year, which is now Person of the Year, in 1928 at the age of 25. And he remained the youngest person to ever receive that honor until 2019, when Greta Thunberg took that title. A year later, he would marry Anne Morrow. So Anne Morrow was born June 22nd of 1906. She was the second child of Dwight Morrow and Elizabeth Cutter Morrow. Her father was a partner in J.P. Morgan & Co. He later became the U.S. ambassador to Mexico and U.S. senator. Her mother was a poet and a teacher. She wrote several children's books and collections of poetry. She was a pioneer for women's education, and she served as the president for her daughter's alma mater, Smith College. Anne attended the Dwight School for Girls, which taught girls from preschool up to 12th grade. At some point, she changed schools to the Chapin School in New York City, which is where she would graduate from in 1924. Following graduation, she would apply to and attend Smith College, where she would graduate with a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1928. Anne would go on to receive the Elizabeth Montagu Prize for her essay on women of the 18th century, and the Mary Augusta Jordan Literary Prize for her fictional piece titled Lydia Was Beautiful. On May 28, 1929, Anne married Charles Lindbergh. Charles would go on to teach Anne how to fly, and later that same year, Anne would fly solo for the first time. And then in 1930, she became the first woman to earn her first class glider pilot license. Throughout the early 30s, Anne and Charles would explore and chart air routes between continents together. Charles was the pilot, and Anne was the radio operator. Together, the Lindberghs explored polar air routes from North America to Asia and Europe, and the couple became the first to fly from Africa to South America. And then on Anne's birthday, June 22nd, 1930, their first son, Charles Augusta Lindbergh Jr., was born. On March 1st, 1932, the family was staying in their home, which was unfinished on the outer edge of Hopewell, New Jersey. They only went to this home and stayed on the weekends because, like I said, it wasn't finished yet. Full time, they were living at Anne's family estate called Inglewood. So normally on this night, they would have been at the Inglewood estate because it was a Tuesday night. So no one but their really their families and the staff of both homes knew that they were staying there this night. And alongside Betty Gow, which was Charles's nurse, put Charles in his crib for bed around 7:30 p.m. The two then went on with their night, doing their chores, everything that needed to be finished for the day. At around 10 p.m., Betty went into Charles' room to check on him. And this is when she discovered little Charles was gone. They, of course, searched everywhere, thinking that maybe he had simply crawled out of his crib. I mean, he is almost 2, so
Right.
he's moving around. This is when they noticed the window was open and a ransom demand for $50,000 was found sitting on the windowsill. This is when police were notified.
That's a lot of money back then.
Oh, yeah. Shit, girl, it's a lot of money now. What you talking about?
Well, it is, but it's even more back then.
Oh, yeah. So once police arrived, they searched the property. Traces of mud were found on the nursery floor. Footprints that were impossible to measure were located under the second-story window. And 2 sections of an old ladder had been used to reach the window were found still in place. One of the 2 sections on the ladder had broken where it connected to the second section, suggesting that it had broken either as the kidnapper was going up or coming down the ladder. So it's like they took 2 separate ladders and put them
Put
together.
them together.
Yeah. All employees that worked on the property or inside the home were questioned. A second ransom note was received on March 6th, postmarked from Brooklyn on the 4th. This demand increased from the original 50 grand to 70 grand. This would be around $1,151,000 to $1.6 million in today's money. It's outrageous by today's standards, but in
Yeah, that's
1932,
crazy.
even for a wealthy family, it's nearly impossible because remember, they're right in the middle of the Great Depression.
Right. Yeah.
So 2 days later, on March 8th, a third ransom note was received. This one stated that a go-between would not be accepted and requested a note in a newspaper. This was in reference to a doctor named John F. Condon, a retired school principal who had published an offer in the Bronx Home News to act as a go-between for the family and pay an additional $1,000 ransom. I know what you're thinking. I thought the same thing.
Right.
Like, what do you have to do with this, sir?
Right. That's what I was going to say.
And then why would you offer an additional $1,000 that they're not asking for?
Right.
It's weird. So the next day, March 9th, Dr. Condon received what would be the 4th ransom note. So I guess the kidnapper decided that he was going to do a go-between after all. And Colonel Lindbergh had went on to agree with it. So March 10th, Dr. Condon received $70,000 in cash as the ransom had demanded. And right away, through newspaper columns using the code name Japhis, he began to negotiate the payment. On March 12th, Dr. Condon received the 5th ransom note from Joseph Peroni, a taxi cab driver who said he had received it from an unidentified man. This note stated that Dr. Condon would find another note under a stone at a vacant stand 100 feet from an outlying subway station. This sixth note was found, and as per the instructions on the note, Dr. Condon met with a man who called himself John at Woodland Cemetery. Here they discussed payment. This man agreed to prove the identity of the child by giving something the child had with him. Following this, nothing happened. Dr. Condon spent the next few days placing more ads in the papers urging for further contact with the kidnappers to complete the ransom payment and the return of baby Charles. Then, 4 days later, Dr. Condon received a baby sleeper and the seventh ransom note. Colonel Lindbergh identified the sleeper to be his son's, and 5 days later, the eighth note would be received. This note insisted on the compliance of the family and Dr. Condon and informed them that the baby's kidnapping had been planned for about a year before it had happened.
Damn.
Right? On March 29th, Betty Gow had found the baby's thumb guard by the back entrance of the house, which I had to look up what the fuck a thumb guard was because I had no idea. And it's nothing like what you think it is. Like whatever you're thinking a thumb guard is right now, you're wrong.
I would think it was one of those things, like when you sew or something,
Yep, nope,
they
nope,
put those little plastic things on their thumbs.
nope, that's not it.
Oh, okay.
I'll send you a picture
Okay.
because I got a picture. A thumb guard is this weird medieval looking device that is used to keep babies from sucking on their thumb. So it's really hard to describe what it looks like other than that. Okay. So I'm going to put the picture on Facebook for everyone to see it, but I'm going to send it to you now.
Yeah, I want to see it because that's the first thing I think. You know what I'm talking about? The little
Yeah.
rubbery things that people put on
Mm-hmm.
their thumbs. That's what I thought of.
Yeah, that's not right.
That's not it.
Like I said, it's a medieval looking thing. And this is just a drawing of it, like for an advertisement.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that piece that goes around their wrist, it's like a, I don't know, it's like a leather thing. And then the part that goes up over their thumb, that's metal.
Yeah, that's weird. It looked weird in the drawing.
Yeah. I couldn't find like a really good one to post. So it's so weird. So hang on. Let me see if I can find one. It's the most weirdest looking thing I've ever fucking seen. Oh, here we go. Found one. It's so weird. I don't understand why you would put this on your child. Which I mean, back then, I guess that's all they had, but it's still so weird.
Oh, yeah. Looks like a torture device.
Exactly. Like, why would you put that on your infant? Okay, so anyway, on April 1st, of all fucking days, April
April
1st,
Fools.
the 10th ransom note was received. Then the following day, they would receive the 11th. The 12th was found under a stone in front of a greenhouse. On the evening of the 11th, Dr. Condon once again met with the man that he believed to be named John, who agreed to take $50,000 of the ransom in exchange for a receipt in the 13th note. Which I want to pause. I do not understand what is up with all these fucking notes.
That's what I was going to say. That's a lot.
Like 2 or 3, okay, I could say 13? Like you are all over the place. There's 3 different freaking people now involved with these notes. Then you got the ransom collector guy handing out a fucking receipt? For what? The 50 grand of the ransom Dr. Cardone paid? Like, oh, I owe you.
Here's the IOU.
Like, what is happening? I don't understand it. Like, that is the most frustrating part, I think, of all of this. Why? What is up with it? Makes no sense. What the fuck is going on here? Like, honestly, I feel like all of these notes and this quote unquote ransom receipt, it's like some kind of a distraction. Because in the grand scheme of things, I don't know what else would be the purpose for all of this.
It's weird.
Yeah. So anyway, on to the 13th note. So this one stated that little Charles would be found on a boat named Nellie near Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. The following day, the day after they got this note saying that little Charles was on a boat, a search is done to find the boat. Nothing. A second search was later done with, again, no boat named Nellie being found. So again, what the fuck is going on here? Dr. Cardone said that if he saw the man to which he knew as John, he would be able to identify him. Then, on May 12th, 1932, the body of a young child, partly buried and badly decomposed, was found about 4.5 miles from the Lindbergh home. This was the body of Charles Lindbergh Jr.
Aww.
Little Charles' head had been crushed, and a small hole was located inside of his skull. There were also body parts that appeared to be missing. The coroner's examination determined that he had been dead for about 2 months from a blow to the head. So the entire fucking time he was missing.
He was dead.
Yes. The Lindbergh Baby case was and still is one of the FBI's biggest cases. And they were involved in the investigation from day one. So why did it take them 2 years to find the person responsible?
Right.
Well, I'm going to tell you about the investigation done by the FBI, and then we'll go from there. On March 2nd, the day after little Charles had been taken from his bedroom, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, yes, President Hoover, because as we said in our last episode, well, I guess 2 episodes ago, before he was president, he was director of the FBI. The first FBI director, to be exact. So anyway, Hoover contacted the New Jersey State Police Headquarters and informed them that the U.S. Department of Justice would give them any assistance and cooperation of the FBI to bring those that had kidnapped the Lindbergh baby to justice. He told them they could contact the FBI for anything they needed help with, and they would assist to the best of their ability. Over the next few weeks, they acted as a tool for local authorities, basically because they had no jurisdiction to do anything other than that. But then on May 13th, the president directed all government investigative agencies to place themselves at the disposal of the New Jersey State Authority, and the FBI would act as a clearinghouse and coordinating agencies for all investigators on the case on the federal investigative level. 10 days later, on May 23rd, the FBI had informed all banks in the New York area to be on the lookout for ransom money. This was because the money that had been given to this John guy had been listed by their serial numbers, which were handed out to the banks, and they had also used gold certificates, which were about to be no longer in circulation. So these two had serial numbers. So by doing this, they were able to watch for the ransom money coming back into the banks and hopefully be able to catch whoever it was that was using it. And this would ultimately lead them to whoever had taken and killed the Lindbergh baby. 3 days later, on May 26th, the state police announced that they were offering a reward that would not exceed $25,000 for information that would lead to the arrest and conviction of the kidnapper or kidnappers. On June 10th, Violet Sharpay, a waitress in the home of Anne's mother, who had been under investigation, committed suicide by poison just as she was about to be committed. Yep. She had taken cyanide, which is a very brutal and nasty death. By her movements on the night of the abduction, but following this, they were suspicious. Because why would you kill yourself right before you're about to be questioned if you had nothing to do with it?
Right.
So they looked into her movements of the night of the abduction. And I mean, they carefully looked over them. It was figured out that she had no connection with the abduction at all. So why she committed suicide, nobody knows. In September of 1933, President Roosevelt met with the FBI Director Hoover and said that all work on the case needed to be centralized in the DOJ. He further requested that the Attorney General make a request of the Commissioner of the IRS for a detailed report performed by the IRS Intelligence Unit. Then, in October of 1933, it was announced that the FBI would be taking over the case exclusively. The president's recall of all gold and gold certificates would end up being a big aid in the case. About 40 grand of the ransom money had been paid in gold certificates. And of course, once these were returned to the IRS, a large portion of what was in circulation was missing, which was the ransom money. In January of 1934, a letter was sent out to all New York banks and their branches to be looking extremely close for those certificates. And the following month, all FBI officers were issued copies of the Bureau's revised pamphlet of the ransom serial numbers. These pamphlets went out to literally every employee that handled money. Department stores, gas stations, airports, banks, anywhere that they took money from a customer were given a copy of this. So over the course of the investigation, there were thousands of leads all over the U.S. Each followed up on, and as far as the FBI could tell, they were nothing. They looked into local gangs and their possible involvement, nothing. They continued to search for the boat named Nellie, which they'd never found. They checked local cemeteries, their employees. Agents looked into other kidnapping and extortion cases that possibly could have bearing on this case. Nothing. Hundreds of photos and descriptions of known criminals were searched based on the few eyewitnesses looking for this John that Dr. Cardone had met with. Nothing was found. Then on March 2nd, then on May 2nd of 1933, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York had discovered 296 $10 gold certificates and one $20 gold certificate, each being part of the Lindbergh ransom money. These were all parts of currency that had been received by the Reserve on May 1st and had all been deposited in one transaction. Of course, these bills were examined, one found to bear the name and address of a man named J.J. Falker in the amount of $2,980. But this man was never found. Examination of the multiple ransom notes by handwriting experts resulted in a unanimous opinion that these notes were written by the same person, and the writer was of German nationality but spent some time in America. The John that Dr. Cardone had described as Scandinavian, not German. The FBI brought in an artist to come up with a sketch of this John guy, which was produced by details of the man from Dr. Cardone and Joseph, the taxi driver. Next, they looked at the ladder. It was crudely built, but built by someone who was familiar with wood and was mechanically inclined. They examined the ladder for fingerprints, and slivers of the ladder had been analyzed in order to identify the type of wood that had been used to build it. For about 7 months, there was no further gold certificates found, but that changed in August of 1934. From August 20th, 1934 to sometime in September, a total of 16 gold certificates were found, most of them in the area around Yorkville and Harlem. As each certificate was found, a colored pin was placed on a map showing the movements of whoever had the certificates. While investigating each of these discoveries, they found that the man depositing fit the description of the John Dr. Cardone had contact with several times. It was further discovered that most of these bills being used were used at little corner produce stores. On September 18th, the assistant manager of a bank in New York City contacted the Bureau to inform them that they had received a $10 gold certificate. It was discovered that this certificate had come from a local gas station. Upon investigating this, they had learned that on September 15th, an attendant had taken the bill as payment for 5 gallons of gas. She noticed the man fit the description of the guy the FBI had been looking for, and being suspicious of him and the bill, she wrote down his license plate number. And then, upon investigating, this car had belonged to a man named Bruno Richard Hauptmann. So, after this, Bruno's home was closely watched throughout the night of September 18th. And then on the morning of the 19th, he was taken into custody. After some investigation, it was found that Bruno was a German carpenter who had immigrated to the U.S. about 11 years prior. They found a $20 gold certificate on him. He fit the description given to the FBI. And when they searched his home, they found a pair of shoes that had been bought with another 20 gold certificate ransom bill. And he admitted to using the ransom certificate to make those purchases, among others, obviously. So on the night of September 19th, Bruno was positively ID'd as the man that had received the money from Dr. Cardone. The following day, $13,000 in ransom bills were found, stashed inside Bruno's garage. It was also discovered that he had possession of a Dodge sedan, which matched the description of a vehicle seen in the vicinity of the Lindbergh home. Shortly after his arrest, they took handwriting samples that were sent to Washington, where an expert studied these samples compared to the ransom notes. This comparison discovered similarities between the writings. Further investigation revealed that 35-year-old Bruno was from Saxony, Germany. He had a criminal record for robbery and had even spent time in prison. On September 26, 1934, Bruno Hauptmann was indicted on charges of extortion, and then again on October 8th for murder. His trial began on January 3rd of the following year. It lasted 5 weeks. The case against him was circumstantial. Tool marks on the ladder matched tools owned by Hauptmann. The wood from the ladder matched wood he had used as floor in his attic. Dr. Cardone's phone number and address were found written on a door frame inside a closet. And like I said before, his handwriting samples had similar markings as the ransom notes. On February 13th, the jury came back with a verdict. Hauptmann was found guilty of first-degree murder. His sentence was death. The defense, of course, appealed, but on October 9th, the New Jersey Supreme Court upheld the verdict. He then appealed this decision, which was too upheld on December 9th, and he was set to be put to death on January 17th, 1936. But the day of his execution, the governor of New Jersey granted a 30-day stay. And on February 17th, he was re-sentenced to death by electrocution to be completed the week of March 30th. On this day, the pardon courts of New Jersey denied Hauptmann's petition for clemency. And on April 3rd, 1936, at 8:47 p.m., Bruno Richard Hauptmann was electrocuted. But is this where the case truly ends? Was the perpetrator found and justice brought forth? This is where the twist, the questions, and the conspiracies begin. So, do you think they got it right?
Partly yes, partly no. I don't know. Because it's not going to be that easy because you're doing it. So I'm going to say no.
I like to throw things at you.
Right.
Okay, well, I'll ask you that again when we're done.
Okay.
See if I changed your mind. What if the darkest truths aren't that someone snuck into a window in the middle of the night with everyone inside the home still awake, without alarming anyone, and then walking out with a baby, but instead much closer to home? What if the kidnapper or orchestrator was already inside the home? After 2 years, this case was closed, tied up with a neat little bow. But did they get it right? In a quiet, unfinished home with everyone still wide awake, a baby was taken from inside his home and no one heard anything. Not dogs barking, the baby crying, or noises coming from within that baby's room. It's these facts that keep the Lindbergh Baby kidnapping at the top of the most intriguing cases list for more than 90 years. It's brought about conspiracies, accusations, and more questions than answers. And we're going to discuss these. So either theory is possible. And in my opinion, one is much more likely and is not even close to what the authorities originally put forth. So both theories revolve around Lindbergh being responsible for the death of his son, but in two different ways. The first is set forth by Liz Perlman, a retired California judge who became a best-selling crime author. He believes that Lindbergh had lent out his son to a French scientist by the name of Alexis Carrel. This was done so the doctor could perform experiments on his organs. The judge points to the scientist's team to have removed, at the very least, little Charles's carotid and most likely his thyroid. These organs were kept viable for transplantation for 30 days. And Perlman's team believes that little Charles died on the operating table. Lindbergh then fabricated the abduction to avoid being investigated because he believes he was there for the operation and ultimately the death of his son. Both Carrel and Lindbergh believed in eugenics, which, do you know what that is?
No.
Eugenics is the pseudoscience that seeks out to improve the human race through selective breeding. So this leads us to our second theory. So Charles Lindbergh, as I said, was fascinated by eugenics. And in the 1930s, it wasn't a small thing. It was actually very mainstream. And Lindbergh wasn't a casual supporter. He was very deeply invested in this belief. It has since little Charles' kidnapping and death came out that the boy may have had a health condition that would not have fit within the perfect race belief that his father was enthralled in. Little Charles had begun to show signs of rickets, which is a condition that is caused by vitamin D deficiency. He began to show the signs such as having bowed legs, a softer skull, and possible developmental delays, which are all symptoms of rickets. And it appears as though the family was treating this by giving Charles Jr. vitamin supplements because those were found within the house. In an era that was obsessed with physical health and the traits that showed good wealth, this was an issue. And for someone like Charles Sr., who had the ideals and beliefs that he did, this was a major problem. I mean, he was obsessed with the concept of human perfection. And his son, if he had rickets, didn't fit that.
Right.
So consider this, okay? The heir to the Lindbergh legacy. The hero aviator, Charles Lindbergh's firstborn son, may have had this health issue that did not line up with Lindbergh Sr.'s beliefs, with his obsession of strength and perfection. Imagine the frustration and shame that this unhealthy child would bring to your perfect family, which pointed to genetic weakness. What would you do to right that wrong? Well, this controversial and chilling theory says that Charles Lindbergh Sr. orchestrated the kidnapping of his son as a way to erase the flaw of his legacy. And the little death of Charles, there's two theories that caused that. One is that Charles Sr. did this as a mercy killing, believing that little Charles, at his young age, it would be kinder to end his life than let him grow up as an imperfect man, an imperfect heir. The other is that little Charles' death was an accident, that the kidnapper had jostled on the rickety ladder as he was climbing down, and with the baby, he dropped him on the cement below by mistake, which this is what FBI profiler John Douglas believes what actually happened.
The second one?
Yes, that his death was an accident. That the kidnapper had the baby in one arm, used his other arm to come down the ladder, and he lost his footing or jostled or the ladder broke and the baby fell. But there's no evidence to prove either theory. The evidence is circumstantial. What they had on Bruno Hauptmann, although circumstantial, was damning. He had ransom money in his possession. The wood from the ladder matched the wood in his workshop, but it wasn't airtight either. Witness testimonies were shaky, but the media and the public were desperate for closure in this case. And Bruno Hauptmann was the perfect scapegoat. He had no prior connection to the Lindberghs, no previous arrest history within their area. He was a German immigrant. There was no one better to pin it on than him. But he always denied any involvement. He insisted he was innocent all the way up to his execution.
How would he have got the money, though?
I don't know.
Unless he was involved with it with the dad.
That's what I think. I think that, okay, let's get into that in just a second. Because I got a whole spiel, okay? Okay, so was Bruno just bad at lying? Or was the real mastermind behind the kidnapping and the murder of little Charles never investigated to begin with? Could the towering reputation of Charles Lindbergh Sr. have shielded him from not only scrutiny, but from being investigated to begin with? So where does that leave us now? The deeper you dig into this case, the more cracks appear. And with these ever-growing cracks comes more questions left behind that continue to haunt this case for nearly a century. Following the trial, Lindbergh didn't fade into a quiet life, as you would think he would have, seeing how his son was murdered. Instead, he took a very public and disturbing turn. He became an outspoken advocate for eugenics. And he was not shy about his beliefs either. He went on to write about the need to protect the gene pool. And he even supported the sterilization of those that were deemed to be unfit. And even openly admired the Nazi Germany racial policies. So this makes you wonder, was this obsession of his festering in 1932? Did it change the way he viewed his very own son? So I know it's hard to believe that a parent would stage his own son's kidnapping. That would ultimately lead to the child's death. But think about it. With Lindbergh's actions during the investigation and those that he took after the trial, his cold demeanor and the gaps in the case against Bruno, it's not hard to wonder. Could America's aviator hero have been the architect of one of its own greatest tragedies? So now that I've told you the facts of the case, the holes in it, and the theories, I'm going to tell you what John Douglas and other experts that are in the documentary that I watched believe happened. So I believe the same as what they believe. It's the one that makes the most sense to me. So Lindbergh planned the whole thing. He was involved in some way. I don't believe Bruno was as involved as he was said to be, which that's what John Douglas, the exact same thing he said. He was involved in some way because he had some of the ransom money, but he didn't have all 50 grand of it. He only
Right.
had 13 grand. Where's the rest of it? I think he played a very small part, and it's a whole bigger thing. I believe that someone took the baby from his room because Lindbergh believed his son was imperfect and wanted to get him away from his legacy because of his own personal beliefs. I don't think the plan was to kill him. I think, like John Douglas said, it was an accident. But now that he's dead, they have to figure out a way to cover it up. So I think Bruno was the scapegoat because Lindbergh was untouchable. He wasn't a normal celebrity. He was an icon, and he had a reputation that no one was going to mess with. In my opinion, there's no way this wasn't an inside job.
Mm-mm.
It was a Tuesday night, and they normally would have been at their regular home. No one but their family and their staff knew they weren't going to be in their regular home that night. Nobody on the outside would have known that. So there's no way it wasn't an inside job. Like, if it was random and some random person just came into the window, how did they know? Because someone inside the house told them. I believe Charles Lindbergh planned it. There were multiple people involved. The baby was not meant to be killed. I think he was going to be privately adopted out or taken to an orphanage under a different name. And because he was
Right.
accidentally killed, they had to do
That
something to
room.
cover it. Yep. That's what I think. I think Bruno was involved, but had a very small part in it.
He was involved in some way.
Oh, yeah.
He had to have been. He had some of the ransom money.
Mm-hmm. But I don't think he was involved to an extent that he should have been executed.
No, I don't think that either.
I think he played a very small part. I think his job was to do the ransom notes and collect the money. Because if
And
you
build a lot.
remember, the ransom notes were written, according to the expert, it was written by a German man, which Bruno was. But the man that actually did the pickup and drop off that Dr. Cardone had met, he was described as a Scandinavian man. So there was no way that Bruno was the only one. Where'd the
Right.
rest of the fucking ransom money go? Because if he had 50 grand, he had just kidnapped and killed the Lindbergh baby. Why would he stay there? Why wouldn't he take the 50 grand and run? He's using $10 and $20 here and there to get gas and buy food. So I don't know. We'll never know what happened on that cold March night. But one thing we do know for certain is that the story of Charles Lindbergh Jr. is not just about what happened on that March night, but also about what it revealed, the shadows that linger, and the mystery that refuses to let go of America. And that is the case of the Lindbergh baby kidnapping.
I had heard about it, but I didn't know that much about it.
It's crazy, right?
Yes.
That somebody could just put a ladder up against your house, sneak into your child's second story window while every person in the house is still awake, and then sneak out of the house and nobody hear anything.
Yeah.
What kind of sense does that make?
That's wild.
Like, my house was built around the same time that this happened. You barely move your foot and
Mm-hmm.
my floor creaks. There's no way that house was not creaky, especially because it wasn't even finished.
Right.
Like, we'll never know what actually happened, but that's what I think happened.
Hearing the rest of it, I agree with you.
Once you get through the basics of the case, you're like, oh yeah, there's no way he didn't have nothing to do with it. But
Mm-hmm.
then you hear his father's beliefs, what medical condition it is believed that he had. All of that, you're just like, I don't know.
Right.
Yep.
That's wild.
Yeah. I'm hoping that maybe someday they'll figure out what actually happened. They probably won't, but you never know.
Yeah. They probably never will.
One can hope. Okay, that's all I got. Let me see. Next week's episode is a two-parter,
Okay.
and it's a crazy one.
I'm sure it is with you.
Ah, well, come back next week to find out part one and what case we're doing. As always, you can find the photos for this episode on the Facebook page. I don't have a lot, but there are a few. That link's in the description. Make sure to give us a rate and a review. Don't forget to subscribe so you get notifications when our new episodes drop on Mondays. And that's all I got. So we hope you keep listening, and remember to
Watch for monsters.
don't kill people. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.